Welcome to As the World Burns, the podcast where we attempt to make sense of the present moment the old-fashioned way, by reading books.
Knowledge isn't static, so for bookworms like us, we're looking at every single source that we can find, from social media all the way down through books written by Aristotle, in Jamie's case, and trying to learn from the people who have researched and written about whatever it is that's going on in the world today, because even if the content is old, it's still really relevant.
Yeah, so the chances are that even though the present moment feels new and unprecedented, it's not, and someone somewhere has written about it. So the idea is to take each episode, we take a book and we put it under the lens of what's happening today in the moment that we're currently living through, just to try and understand maybe a little bit how we got here, but to try and recognize the patterns of history in the moments of today.
Exactly. And, just personally, the world seems like it's falling apart right now. It's a complete disaster. And I don't know, I guess especially us, like Gen X / millennials, are at a point in our lives where we never thought we would be. And a lot of us feel powerless, and we want to be able to do something. And that's sort of a refrain that we hear everywhere, right? Jamie, what can I do? What can I do? I hate what's happening, but what can I do? I think this is our small way of trying to make our voices heard and maybe provide people with a deeper understanding of a topic that they might not have. In the process, we're learning quite a lot as well. But we want to get a little deeper, a little more meaningful, and also sort of hold the powers that be to task. Because, from my perspective, I grew up in a completely different country that did fall into authoritarianism. And we were not allowed to criticize the government. Journalists were routinely arrested or assassinated, and it still happens. I kind of lived my life in a fearful manner, and when it comes to that country, I still kind of do, because I have family there, and I don't want them to be negatively affected by my thoughts. And then I started thinking, what if we fall into that same situation? Because we see those patterns emerging, right? So what if we fall into that same situation here? How am I going to feel when my grandchildren say to me, what did you do when the world was falling apart? Am I going to sit back and say, I didn't do anything because I was scared? No. So this is what we're doing. This is what I want to do. And thankfully, my partner in crime also wanted to join in this endeavor.
And the idea is to inspire discussion. Because in the world of social media and talking in an echo chamber, it's really easy to just hear what aligns with your beliefs, right? But in order for democracy to thrive, we need debate, we need discussion. And so the most radical thing that we can do in this time when we feel completely impotent and incapable of doing anything, the most radical thing that we can do is be educated and to talk to each other. So as we go through this podcast and we try and inspire that discussion by modeling it, we're going to be having debates and discussions and talking to each other instead of listening to a social media algorithm. Because that's how we strengthen, and we're about to talk about this today, that's how we strengthen the unwritten norms that hold our democracy together.
And just to close, this first podcast introduction, just a couple of things. Number one, we're not professional podcasters. We are two friends who have known each other for a long time. We've always had a really good ability to have a great discussion, a deep discussion. And we're probably going to go have some wandering thoughts. We might say something incorrect. Forgive us in advance, please. We'll hopefully get our groove. But I think what's more important is the content and provoking those thoughts and those deep discussions on your end. So it's not just about holding us to task or making sure that we're correct in something. If you agree with us, great. Let's have a conversation. If you don't agree with us, even better. Let's have a good, deep conversation. And just one thought to close. I read a book last weekend that actually we're going to talk about later today, but it's called Book and Dagger by Elise Graham. And the opening, this is basically about how historians and librarians and artists were sort of unlikely spies during World War II and the Nazi resistance. So this is actually highly relevant for today. And it was a great, quick read, but there was a line in here that really stood out to both me and Jamie and pretty much everybody that we've been talking to about the book. The line is the power of power from below. So that idea that change comes from ordinary and informed people is what really made us feel like we might have a really good forum here. We are just two ordinary people. We're moms. We have full-time jobs. We own side businesses. We do a lot. Do we have time to be doing this? No. But we want to. We want to because it's important. So maybe join us in our little power from below, and maybe that'll get us to a point where, you know, our voices collectively will be heard more loudly.
And I would like to add to that by saying that if you disagree with us, I challenge you to even more to listen to us. If you agree with us, that's easy. It's if you disagree with us and you immediately turn off your ears and you stop listening and you turn away, that's when democracy dies. We have to find a way to talk to each other and to be able to hear opposing opinions, because I like to believe I'm always right, but I also recognize that I'm not always right, and that's okay.
So your husband's going to be like, I'm writing this down. I'm writing this down.
Hang on, this was recorded? Can I just have that in my ringtone?
No, but it's true. We don't want to be the people who feel like we're always right all the time. We do need to have these discussions, and I feel like that is a really good segue into who we are. So, Jamie, take it away.
All right, I'm Jamie. I am a self-proclaimed bookworm. You can see by the many books behind me, there are 3 more walls filled similarly. I am also an observer of the world, an increasingly concerned observer of the world. And I'm happy to be with y'all today.
Yeah. And I'm Mel, and I am a fellow bookworm. I love to read pretty much anything that's a current events topic, political science, history, and of course the occasional ridiculous fantasy magical things, which is a great escape. I try to be an optimist, but I'm kind of more of a pessimist. So this is definitely an exercise for me to try to restrain my pessimistic tendencies. But we are 2 old friends, as I mentioned before. We're 2 old friends that feel equally stabby about what's going on in the world. And this is our way of trying to make our voices heard and maybe give you guys some food for thought and a voice as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about our first book. So today, this week, our first episode,
A
How
really
Democracies
good
Die.
indicator of the differences between me and Melissa is how organized hers is and how chaotic mine is. I just want to point that out right at the beginning to set expectations from the start.
Hey, you know, organization is a different thing. You know, I think we both have varying degrees of ADHD, but what we're going to try to do is go through some of the points of this book in relation to some of the more prevalent news articles that are out today, some of the more prevalent events, I guess, that are out today. Basically, the premise of the book, and I'm just going to read from my notes here, is that democracies usually don't collapse in one dramatic coup. And that's true. So it's a slow, gradual erosion through elected leaders, weakened norms, partisan extremism, and institutions that get hollowed out while everyone insists that everything is fine. Does that sound familiar, Jamie?
Wildly relevant to current events.
So the way that we want to do this is we've divided it into kind of segments that have pulled out some of the main themes of the book. So we're going to talk a little bit about those and sort of tie them to some current events. So Jamie, go ahead and start with our first topic.
Yeah, so a really big theme of the book is that, as Melissa already said, democracies don't die in a big dramatic coup with tanks rolling in and guns blazing. It's incremental, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like the analogy of if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, they're going to jump right out. But if you put a frog in a pot of water and heat it up to boiling, it will boil itself to death and it won't do anything. And that's a big theme of this book, is these things happen slowly over decades, and it goes through the past several decades of the United States and how we got here. And some of the changes feel necessary. They feel like they were good changes, but they sort of opened the door to a snowball effect of changes that were not so great. And it helps us understand sort of how we got to the position that we are today.
Yeah. So here's an example. So I'm looking at some reporting from the Associated Press and Reuters. By the way, we'll have all of these links. We'll have all of these links in our show notes, so you can actually go and look at them as well. We try to use the most balanced reporting possible, and typically we'll go use Reuters or Associated Press whenever possible. But so there has been a steady stream of reporting on states specifically tweaking election rules, and they're doing it in really teeny tiny ways that, certification, oversight, ballot counting, what have you. And they look maybe like technical, like Jamie was saying, oh, this is a good thing. But when you look at them in the aggregate, they've made these tiny little tweaks. And basically like 50 tiny tweaks later, you have a completely different system, which is not the system that you should have. So here's a really good example of something that happened recently. So we had the primaries in Texas just a couple weeks ago. This is so we're recording in the latter half of March, and so early March, the primaries in Texas happened. And the main thing that I noticed being reported, aside from the massive amount of voter turnout, which was heartening, was that there was a procedural change made by the Republican Party, the Dallas County Republican Party. Typically, both parties in previous elections had agreed that voters could cast their ballots on a precinct-based voting system. So if you were anywhere in Dallas County, you did not have to go to a voting space or a polling place that you were specifically assigned to. You could just vote anywhere in Dallas County. And apparently this has been the case for a long time. However, for this election, the Dallas County Republican Party decided that they were not going to agree to this. And apparently both parties needed to agree to this, if I remember correctly. And because of that, a lot of people showed up at the polls, not where they were assigned to vote officially, without knowing that this was a change. So it wasn't announced or made clear. In fact, I do believe that a local judge asked for Dallas County to extend their voting hours by 2 hours in order to be able to allow people to go to where they needed to vote. And I think, if I remember correctly, the Texas Supreme Court indicated that those votes would not be counted. What is this doing, Jamie? What was the purpose of this?
To make it harder to vote, to suppress votes, right? So, and which ties in really great with our book, because in this book, the authors give us a sort of litmus test, a checklist of how we can recognize that a democracy is under attack. And one of them is undermining the democratic institutions like elections, right?
Yep.
And how many times? Like, not only this, but there's that whole bullshit in Fulton County, Georgia, where the FBI went in and seized fucking election records, just seized all of them. They didn't ask for copies. They didn't do any of that bullshit. That was all over the news. And as I was looking into that in preparation of this podcast, so thank you, I found out that Fulton County is going toe to toe with federal government and they were ordered to go to mediation. Mediation failed. The federal government is trying to get a motion to quash a subpoena for an FBI agent that was part of that raid to testify in an upcoming hearing. How shady is that shit? So talking about undermining elections and undermining our democratic systems, and they do it by sowing distrust, right? Donald Trump ran on that shit. He ran
Absolutely.
on the concept of draining the swamp because you only think that you live in a free society. You only think that you live in a democracy, but you really don't. It's full of all of these corrupt people, but if you elect me, I will fix it all. I will bulldoze everything and we're going to have the best country in the world. But that doesn't work because one single politician doesn't give two shits about the rest of us,
Exactly.
right? That's why we have checks and balances. But when you sow that distrust in the very systems that protect you, you're willing to let it go, and it happens incrementally. In his first term, he sowed that distrust. In his second term, he's bulldozing over
Absolutely.
all of those democratic
No
institutions.
holds barred. Everything is out
Yeah.
on the table now. They're doing everything they can to topple whatever our institutional norms are. And
But
it's not just Donald Trump doing this. Obviously, other countries have done very similar things. We're looking at Hungary, Viktor Orban, the prime minister. What did they do? They had a parliamentary supermajority of their party, and they implemented gradually over years, not just once. They rewrote the Constitution to change rules around courts, elections, and institutional powers. This was all legal. It was done above board, but it was death by a thousand cuts, right? So they did all these tiny little things. And what happened? They completely gathered the power under their own party, which in the long run is giving them unprecedented and unchecked power. Turkey did the same thing or very similar.
well, and it gives them legitimacy, right? Because they're
Right.
doing it under the guise of democracy, while their real goal is to take away the rights that we're guaranteed under a democracy.
That comes down to something for us, right? Like, as the people who are affected by this, as the voting public, how do we, or what do we do? How do we recognize this when it's happening?
Can we recognize it?
Can we recognize
That's what
it?
I would challenge. And as I was reading this book, and the thing is, like, when you read a book like this, it's really easy to say, "Oh my God, this is all happening. Oh my God, this is all happening,"
Yeah.
and to start feeling sort of panicked. But here's the key: all of these things are subjective, and can we actually recognize when someone crosses the line? I think raiding an election office and taking the records is 100% crossing the line. And thank God Fulton County is going up against the federal government for that. But who's to say when you've actually crossed a line?
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing that I couldn't stop thinking about when I was reading this book is throughout all of this, I grew up in a family that was filled with conspiracy theorists, and I am so scared of becoming a conspiracy theorist. And so as all of this is happening, and I'm trying to say, oh, you know what? No, Jamie, you've already always told yourself, don't automatically compare people to Hitler. Don't automatically compare a political party to Nazis. And I'm trying to tell myself this, but when does that become a guardrail against me becoming a crazy delusional conspiracy theorist? And when does that just make me delusional, right? Like
I mean,
how do you recognize that we cross that line?
I think you've articulated that better than I ever could. I am not prone to sort of falling into those things, but honestly, what is happening right now, over and over again, every time you think that this is the worst that could possibly happen, somebody has to do something, somebody has
Hold
to
my
stop
beer.
it. Yeah, every time you think you've reached the pinnacle of bullshit, of absurdity, of how is this possibly happening in this timeline and get me the fuck out of here, something worse happens. So, like, I don't know. I think that at this point, we have to believe that there's some sort of conspiracy because it has gone leaps and bounds beyond anything that's logical or, I don't know, normal. So, sorry, I get all riled up about this, but like, it doesn't make sense. People that are not questioning and holding the powers that be to task about this are either completely willfully ignorant, uneducated, or just too comfortable in their own lives to give a shit.
Well,
But I don't
and
know.
one thing that the book, and I'm sorry, I'm probably jumping ahead about of what we wanted to talk about, but one thing that I really, really loved is when the book was talking about the guardrails of democracy. a really important one are norms of democracy, things that are the unwritten rules of democracy. But I really loved the discussion about political parties as the gatekeepers of
Yeah.
democracy.
Yeah.
And in the book, they talk about the Republican National Convention when Donald Trump got the nomination against all odds, and how the
Yeah.
political party just caved and they
Mm-hmm.
relinquished their job as the gatekeeper to democracy. And I found that a very fact, because I've never really thought of the political parties in our country as gatekeepers to democracy. It all just kind of seems like a circus show. But the
Well, yeah.
more populous they're becoming, right? They're out for the popular vote now because we're less run by the political and philosophical and financial elite the way that we used to be, and it is more of a not a direct democracy because we're still a representative democracy, but the direct interactions with the people and the opinions of the people matter too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
To where our political parties are performing for their constituents rather than legislating on political ethics.
Well, that, I mean, it's very performative, absolutely. But second, the political party is performing at the behest of the man who is supposedly in charge. Although, here's my conspiracy theorist, it's the people behind him that are using him as a puppet who.
100%. But
Yeah,
I would even
yeah.
challenge that the Democratic Party is becoming just as performative,
Oh,
and it's really frustrating
agree.
to me.
Agree.
So, and I mean, there are people that I really love, like AOC, Bernie Sanders. But you want to know the interesting thing about AOC and Bernie Sanders? They're the only two people in Congress that don't take special interest money.
Mm-hmm. And so they have no issues speaking up. And then you've got congressmen who vote against the War Powers Resolution which is absolutely what should have happened across the board unequivocally, but they take special interest money. Mm-hmm. So, but this is actually a really good segue because our second sort of comment, and I feel like, let me just back up. We're never going to actually be able to discuss every single aspect of each point that we want to, otherwise we'd be here for like a week. But,
Right.
Just some really good food for thought, and we can come back to it too. Hoping to get some great feedback, and then we can discuss further. But our second point that we really wanted to discuss is these guardrails are norms, not just laws. And so the book talks about two norms that are kind of unwritten rules.
By saying,
yeah,
we've definitely crossed the line on this one.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I don't even think it's subjective.
Oh, absolutely. So there are two main unwritten rules that democracies rely upon, and this is universal across the board. So one of them is called mutual toleration, and it refers to the idea that as long as our rivals play by constitutional rules, we accept that they have an equal right to exist, compete for power, and govern. It's kind of like cosmic universal balance. And the second one is institutional forbearance. And that is basically avoiding actions that, while respecting the letter of the law, obviously violate its spirit. Jamie, would you like to tell the viewers where we are with this?
So I was recently, because I like to scroll reels on Instagram, and
Don't
when
we all?
I,
Yeah.
I recently saw this video where it was just a collage basically of different videos of Barack Obama spliced with speeches by Donald Trump, and I think it really hit home to me. And of course, like, I've seen it, I'm living it, we're all living in it. We were here when Obama was president. We're here now when Donald Trump was president for the second fucking time. But I don't think I recognized how dramatically different politicians were speaking about their opponents before Donald Trump.
Oh.
There was a measure of respect. There
Yes.
was a measure of, listen, I understand that we are on opposite ends of the spectrum, but I respect how you got here. I respect that you're an intelligent person and that you're a human being, and I can speak to you like a human being. And versus Donald Trump's State of the Union address.
I couldn't even watch that, truthfully, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but my heart couldn't take it.
No, it was awful. And I mean, he didn't even he clearly was only speaking to half of the country. He was clearly only
Right.
speaking to half of the room. He blatantly said, you know, the Democrats don't care what I have to say, and you know,
Yeah.
they're going to boo, and they're I mean, demonizing your opponent is probably one of the biggest red flags that you're an authoritarian fucking politician. And I'm
That's
sorry I keep
exactly
swearing, but
right.
I'm very passionate about this.
Well, I mean, and that, number one, hello, but number two, that is
That's
actually
right.
one of our
Melissa
points that we're
taught me
just.
how to drop the F bomb.
Did I really?
You sure did. I was a good little Mormon girl and I was scared to drop the F bomb.
I don't know if I should feel ashamed or extremely proud. I'm gonna go with proud.
You should.
That is actually demonization. The polarization turns opponents into enemies is a topic that we're going to discuss. But it actually, and a lot of the examples that we talk about would apply to any of the points that we really wanted to hit here. But I mean, for example, there was a segment of the book that talked about, I forget what convention it was, where they were trying to do some backroom deals, which is basically, what was it? It was like the Republic, no, or the it was some convention.
It was one of the conventions. Are you talking about? It was like Henry Kissinger or something like that, right?
Yeah,
Where they were talking about how he was gaining popularity, but then talking about gatekeeping. The political party met at
exactly.
the convention, and they were discussing, and they said, "No, he's too radical.
He's
He's
too
too
radical.
like he's going to undermine our country and what we stand for. We're not going to allow him to get the nomination, right?"
Exactly. And so, what is it? What happened in this country that allowed for Donald Trump to actually secure the nomination? Were we that confident? Was the party that confident that it wouldn't happen in the primaries? So they just didn't pay attention to it? What
Well,
happened?
an interesting thing that I don't know, maybe I'm stupid, I'm gonna be honest, but
I'm going to say you're not.
I don't think I realized that this happened, but it was after that they instituted primaries and they gave the people more of a direct role in the nomination
Oh,
for,
yes, you're right.
right? You
That is
remember
what
that part
happened.
of the book? So, and I didn't realize that happened. I just thought we always had primaries. Like I said, like maybe
Well, it's
I,
because it happened before our lifetime. And so,
right.
like, some of the things you
And,
think, that, yeah, they were just always
but
there.
I will say a point of the book, and this was part of where I started to feel it, is I think the book, because our country was founded by people who are elitists, right? They
Mm-hmm.
didn't want the people to have power. They didn't want the
Exactly.
people to directly govern themselves. They wanted the smart people and the wealthy people to be the governors
Wealthy white
of,
people.
or the white people, exactly, to be
Mm-hmm.
the leaders in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And like they even wanted a monarch. Some of our founding fathers wanted a monarch, and the idea
Right.
of a popularly elected president was a really difficult concept for them to come to terms with, right? And there was the whole Sedition Act. Do you remember that, where like
Yeah.
almost
I just
anything,
learned about all that. Well, because
right?
I didn't grow up here, so I've
Yeah.
actually been learning about United States history throughout this exercise, and it is a lot darker than I had expected it to be, because having grown up where I did, where there was a lot of whatever, like what's happening in this country now was happening there. I always thought that the United States was the paragon of democracy and everything was, perfectly done and on the up and up. And little did I know about, the dark history of the country's founding. And what's happened is I think that we went through a period where things were generally okay. And so, I should say generally okay for like white people. And so I don't think there was a lot of pushback. The economy was fine, whatever. And then we elected a black president, the economy tanked, and people started getting really fucking upset and trying to pass blame. And then along comes this blowhard who is giving the voice to the people that, in their heads wanted to say all this stuff for their entire lives because they're racist and bigoted and have always felt like the people who are the elites were taking something away from them. So they were given a voice suddenly that it was okay to say the things that
And they're
This
like,
man
oh,
is
all these
saying,
terrible things that I've been thinking deep down dark in the dark depths of my soul. He is saying them on national television, and everyone loves him. Oh
and they're
my God.
legitimate now.
Maybe I'm not the bad guy that everyone it's the white man syndrome. Like, oh, I can't be a strong white man in this. No one's oppressing you. Shut
No,
up.
my God, shut up. It's so true. And I mean, like other guardrails, like for example, just so we can finish out this point, um, let's talk about what's been happening recently. So right after Trump came into office the second time, what did he do? He issued a series of executive orders that essentially punished law firms who are part of our, societal norms that keep things balanced, that were working with anybody or any subject that he considered adversarial. So let's see. He targeted firms carrying out work that were doing pro bono work for immigration, transgender rights, or anything that had to do with January the 6th that was not defending somebody who was one of the seditionists, basically. This is actually causing a lot of firms to scale back on pro bono work because they don't want to anger it. They're scaling back on diversity initiatives. That's actually affecting them negatively. They're not able to recruit new talent because, they have to keep those associates coming in. People are scared to do what's right because the executive orders basically threaten, access for these attorneys to get into federal buildings, which, is part of their jobs with some of those cases, right? Limiting access to officials, so they wouldn't be able to even talk to a judge if they needed to, or even like a county clerk, like they wouldn't be able to work with them. And then threatening government contracts that the clients of those law firms hold. And so if they're large clients that have larger government contracts, they're going to put pressure on the law firm to say, hey, you're not earning any money from this pro bono work, so you need to focus on us. So none of this is illegal, right? None of this is illegal. This is all above board. But is it ethical? Is it something that's operating within the guardrails that have had this country, like that have been keeping this country in check for a long time? I'm going to say no.
And that's the hard thing about again talking about our political parties as the gatekeepers for these candidates, and allowing someone to become the nominee and then be elected president with no background and no understanding about how politics work,
Exactly.
and trying to run a country like a business. Because if you think about it, if you're opposing business, if someone who you're going against in business goes against you, it makes 100% sense to go after them financially, to cut them off at the knees financially. That makes sense in a business. In a country, that is not an ethical move, right?
No.
You can't say, I'm not getting my way. I'm going to make sure that you don't get the funding that you need to continue to operate because you're not giving me what I want.
It's
That is,
punitive.
yes, it's punitive, and for sure. Okay, maybe you didn't do anything that was blatantly unconstitutional or illegal, but maybe that was not the ethical move, and maybe that was not the thing that we want, or the move that we want the leader of the free world to make and to represent us to the world in that kind of way.
Yeah.
So
And I
anyway.
think, yeah, but what it comes down to is it a good idea for democracy to be as dependent on people actually behaving like human beings and how we expect them to?
100%. And those unspoken norms. I was thinking about this because we have our constitution, right? But there are democracies that don't have, like, they run on these unwritten norms, right? So
Right.
the UK is a really good example. They have been running on the majority of their stuff as unwritten norms. That may not be an accurate statement. Don't kill me if you're from the UK. Um, but and they're able to function and thrive as a democracy without that. So do we need to have these guardrails written into a document? But how much political weight does that document have? Because we have democracies, or countries that have tried democracy by superimposing our constitution, the United States Constitution, over their government, and it's not worth the paper it's written on.
This is
So which one
true.
is the better? Which one is the better? Do you have to have it codified, or is it better to have these sort of gentleman handshake agreements of how society runs?
Well, two things. Number one, gentleman handshake does not have the weight that it used to, as we are
Very
seeing
true.
now. So
Very
that there's
true.
that. And maybe
Yeah.
it'll come back. I don't know. And I hate to have just like gentleman's handshake is the word, but you know.
I know. That
But
sounds
colloquially, I could never say that right. Colloquially, that's the term.
yeah.
But secondly, even if it is codified, even if the Constitution is amended, there are so many loopholes and oh, this is not what they intended type of discussions and all of these things. You could write down every possible scenario and somebody will still find a way to circumvent it and still have it be legal. So is it worth that effort? Because if
Right.
somebody wants to get around something that is a rule, a regulation, or a norm, they're going to do it if they want to do it.
But we're seeing right now those norms, Donald Trump blows them out of the water again by sneaking up to the line at first. He sneaks up to the line, he doesn't cross it. He gets us used to it incrementally. So we're uncomfortable as he's sneaking up to the line. And then he comes back later and we were uncomfortable sneaking when he's sneaking up to the line as he like tiptoes over the line. We're like, that's weird. That
Sticks
makes
his
me
toe
feel
in. Yeah.
uncomfortable. That makes me feel but he goes further and further and further over the line. So now that norm is no longer something we care about. It's no longer something we even remember was a norm. And I'm not saying we're there yet, but I see that trend happening over and over and over.
It's the frog being boiled analogy, which I
Exactly.
use so much in daily life, but it is very, very accurate in this case.
Yes.
Okay, so obviously we're not going to solve any of that right now, but our next point is that elections are not enough, right? So like authoritarianism can come through elections, and it has come through elections in the United States, Turkey, Hungary, several other countries.
Germany, Italy, Venezuela,
Germany,
Peru.
yeah.
What other ones do they talk about in the book?
Oh my God, so many. Should we talk about the countries that don't have authoritarianism? Because I feel like that would be a shorter discussion.
Right?
Yeah, it's a little crazy, but
Well,
a
and
lot of it is because sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of it is
No.
because the elections don't automatically what you vote for isn't what happens, right?
Right.
War against Iran, prime example.
Well, we're looking at the patterns of history because one thing that everyone always says is those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, but that's not actually the case. It's those who don't learn their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of history because nothing is exactly the same. So even the examples in the books, Hitler, Mussolini, Chavez, like they're not exactly the same as what we're going through together or right now, but they help us see the patterns. And the patterns aren't the same, but they rhyme. And I think
They
that's a
do.
really important thing to
Yes.
remember when you're studying history is it's not going to be identical, but you have to be able to recognize these patterns. And and that's what I keep coming up against. When am I being an alarmist? And when is this actually something that I need to be concerned about? And I think that their litmus test in this book is a really sound one, but I think it's too subjective. I think that we need to have this is the line, and how do we know we crossed it? But I don't think there's a way to do that either, and I find myself very frustrated.
Well, yes, and also even if we've crossed the line, then how do we handle that? You know, alarmist or not, how do we respond to that? You know, it's all well and good what we're doing here, and I do hope that it makes some sort of difference. I do. But the people who are representing us in our legislative bodies are supposed to be protecting us. And it's not happening because of a myriad of reasons. Obviously, part of it are the special interest funding that they receive and all of those things. What we vote for, again, isn't what we're getting. We are voting for our representatives to represent us, our senators, our congressmen, our senators, our local elected officials. But if they are taking action and voting in accordance with the special interest groups from which they receive money, or from who they receive money, what's the right grammar there? That's an issue. So what does that mean? Do we need to abolish everything and start from scratch? Get rid of campaign finance? I mean, these are discussions that this is like Pandora's jar, right? Like we could talk about this forever. But that I think is the crux of sort of this point in the book, is that you're voting for something. Even when you vote for something doesn't mean that you are avoiding an authoritarian regime ruling over you, essentially.
100%. And it's going to be really interesting to me talking about dismantling democratic systems as a warning sign, right? Or undermining democratic systems as a warning sign. It's going to be really interesting to me to see what happens with the upcoming midterms.
Yes.
Because I'm kind of holding my breath until we get to the midterms, because I see that as sort of our pivotal point. Depending on how it goes, depending on what happens, that is going to determine whether we're going to descend into fascism and authoritarianism, or whether our democracy has a chance to survive this. And I really, and that may seem alarmist, but we're either going to have the midterms, and likely the Democratic Party is going to take control of Congress. And wouldn't that be great? Because then we can actually do something. Because I agree with you. It feels like our politicians aren't doing anything, but there's not a ton they can do right now, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I guess there isn't a ton that they can do, but there are what they should be doing, or what they can actually do, they're not doing, right? Like war powers resolution voting is one of those things. Like this war that they've waged, that this government has waged, in alliance with Israel against Iran.
That Donald Trump waged and then asked for permission from Congress, which, can we just talk about how fucking ass backwards that was?
This is my point.
Why is no one outraged in Congress?
So
that's a really good point.
Then you need to be voting. You know, what he should be is checked immediately by our legislative body.
Yeah.
Why aren't they doing that? Why? Yeah. We know why.
Because he has developed this cult of personality where everyone is so scared to go against him because they're going to get crucified.
Exactly.
And that's what I mean about and the thing is, Donald Trump and Republicans, they know that the midterms is a pivot. That's why they're trying to pass this fucking SAVE Act. And
oh my God,
I really liked, you posted and then I reposted it, that Instagram thing about where the Republican congressman said something about we have to pass the SAVE Act or we're going to lose the midterms. And then someone retweeted it and they're like, this is saying the quiet part out loud.
The quiet part out loud.
Rig the elections so that you don't lose your majority.
They know that the people are fed up, and it is in our hands technically, but that is all assuming that whoever we do elect, if there is change, if some of those seats are flipped, are actually going to vote in accordance with what they are saying they're going to vote in accordance with, which, you know, so it's a lot of
have backbone against this monster.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that was a little bit too extreme. But...
No, but okay. Have you ever seen the movie The Distinguished Gentleman? It's old. No. It's from the 80s. It's Eddie Murphy is in it, so it's pretty classic.
I should watch it.
You should watch it. But essentially, this film it's hilarious, but it also talks a lot about the way that DC functions. And so, like, I lived in DC for 15 years or something like that. Went to college there, went to grad school there. My oldest son was born there. It's my US based home, right? Or it was. So I was always really interested in any movie or anything that had to do with that. And I used to go to like congressional hearings and write summaries of whatever was going on for our clients, because I worked for a really small lobbying firm. So I loved that movie because it essentially is Eddie Murphy is a con man, of course, in Florida. He decides that he wants the very cushy life of a congressperson, runs on name recognition because he has the same name as the congressman who's a white dude who I think died or something. So he slides in on name recognition, goes to Washington, and he's like, oh, this is great. Like, people are offering to do a fundraiser for him and pay him for speaking at a lunch and all this stuff, and all this money's rolling in, right? It's the best job he's ever had. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly how the government functions. Of course, you had a feel-good segment in there where one of his constituents was coming in. It was a little girl with cancer, and she was affected by, I think it was some large wastewater treatment plant, something, electricity plant, something. You know, it tugged at his heartstrings, and he was able to get change made and blah, blah, blah. we all know that doesn't happen. But the part that really always stood out for me was, this is satire, technically. This is all a fictionalized version, supposedly, of what's going on in DC, but it really is what happened in DC all the time. You get to Congress, you have like all these gung-ho, like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that, and I'm not gonna let anybody, tell me how to vote. And then you've got all these senior Congress people, you've got the special interest groups, they're all coming in behind you and trying to get you in their pocket. That is exactly what happens, and that is what I'm worried about. Sorry, that's the end of my rant.
Because, like I said, 2 people in Congress right now do not take money from special interest groups. That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
And those rules should change. Yeah. I've never understood that. This isn't a thing in other countries. This is a thing here. So yeah, it's a little wild to me. All right, let's move into our next discussion point. And Jamie, you brought this up earlier, so I want you to sort of revisit that to start off with. But polarization, turning opponents into enemies.
Oh yeah. I think that's probably what we're seeing the most of here, right?
Agreed.
So your opponent isn't just someone on the other side of the stage you're debating, right? Your opponent is a criminal. They're evil. They're demonized. If they win, our country is over as we know it. Like
trying to
delegitimize the most nihilistic, yeah. And so when people are living paycheck to paycheck, and God, there was a quote in the book. What was it? Democracy is hard to defend when you can't eat, or something like that. It was Hugo Chavez. Remember?
Yes.
God, I wish I'd bookmarked
Which of my notes is it?
I wish I'd bookmarked it, but
I know.
And right now, I feel like we feel that, right? It's hard to think logically and to think on a higher level. Especially for political discussions, when you're struggling to figure out how you're going to put food on the table, right? And so demonizing your political opponents gives your constituents or the people listening to you someone to blame for what they're feeling, right? And so when you're giving them an emotional target to blame for everything that's wrong in their lives, they're going to look to you as their savior. And then you have demagogues that are able to take power, right? And so this is probably the most frightening thing that I see happening right now, because it's not just Donald Trump. It is everyone, including Democrats, including me. I do it too. I fall into the trap too. I hear people talking about, like, the Epstein files is big right now, and it's horrifying. And I want to look away so badly, and I'm trying not to, because I think it's important that we keep the discussion alive, and that we don't let ourselves get distracted, as hard as it is to see it. But it's hard to look at a man holding the highest office in our country who is accused of raping and murdering children.
Oh my God.
Like it's hard not to see them as evil and vile. At the same time, it's really important for us. We're who are going to combat this, right? Political figures are going to try and turn us against each other and see each other as evil. And it's really easy in this climate to give into it and to be like, yes, they are evil. I've done it too. Yes, Republicans are idiots. They're all evil. I hate them all. It'd be so easy. But it's also intellectually lazy, right? And
oh my God.
It's important to
I feel very called out, but it's true. It is intellectually lazy.
Right. So it's important for us because obviously we are impotent. We can't control what the political leaders in our country are doing or saying about the opposition. All we can do is keep reminding ourselves that we're all human beings, and we need to find a way to discuss, right? A way to have discussions with people who disagree with us, to not be in our own echo chamber because social media algorithms only parrot back to you the things that you put into it. So of course you're going to be scrolling through TikTok or scrolling through Instagram Reels, and you're only going to see videos that you agree with, and it's going to enrage you, and it's going to feed into that idea of, you know what, these political figures are right. The other party sucks. They're terrible people. They should be locked up. They should not be in power anymore. That's when this point of the book becomes catastrophic. We have to combat it because no one else will.
This is a really good point. It does come back down to us. what I struggle with, and I know you do too, and I know so many people do, is that when you do try to have those conversations with somebody with an opposing viewpoint, and that person's talking points are ill-informed, and you try to give them the facts, you know, and one might argue, well, your talking points are ill-informed and you don't have the facts. I like to think, as an educated adult human who is a citizen of the world, that I try to seek out as much balanced information as possible. Do I have confirmation bias? Yes, every human being does. I fully admit that, but I also try to understand their point of view. If it's an opposite point of view, I try not to dismiss them. But part of the problem is some people, that when you try to have these conversations with them, not only do they come at you with blatantly incorrect facts, like to the point of complete lies, they're parroting, like you said, what they've heard in their own sort of social media and Fox News or whatever algorithms. The conversation comes to a standstill because it's frustrating for someone like me. It's like hitting a wall. You can't get over that wall because that person believes so deeply what they've been told, that they're the victims, that they're the ones being wronged. They can't just kind of look, what is that term? Look past the end of their own noses to see what's happening in the rest of the world. I struggle with that.
Distrust of education, distrust of facts, distrust of the media, just distrust of everything but the words that are coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. I agree with you. It makes it really hard to have logical discussions with people who refuse to believe science and facts and reality.
Reality, exactly. Well, I mean, do you follow Isaiah Martin on social media? Isaiah Martin is somebody. He's a young Black politician. I think he ran for Congress at one point, was not successful, but I've been seeing snippets of what is that debate thing where you can have like a revolving debate. You've got what is that called? I forget.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about, where one person's in the hot seat and then people come in
and whatever. So he's done a couple of those, and then I think he has a podcast where people will call and try to basically argue with him. And I just caught a snippet of one. I think you can catch him on YouTube. I've just been seeing like the little social media things. Yeah. But one of them was a guy who...
Social media. Let's talk about this thing that we saw on social media.
But you know, I mean, let's face it, we all kind of do the doom scrolling. But one man called in and was basically saying something like, well, you Democrats, you just, you know, you want open borders. You want... trans people to take over whatever and all of these things. And so he like picks at the argument and he says, how do we want open borders? How did whatever politician, I think somebody claimed, oh, Biden opened the border. He's like, how do you do that? How do you do that? And they never have an answer. But what ends up happening in that when he says, and this is just one example, he does this generally, he will find a point that the caller brings up and will literally say, that's not true, or give me an example, give me the facts. And they keep parroting these talking points that you can see it, that they've heard wherever they've heard it. They've, Biden opened I keep hearing Biden opened the borders. The economy's in terrible shape. The gas prices are, the gas prices, food prices, all of these things. Are people not living in reality right now? Like, are they not seeing what is happening? Are you still blaming Biden?
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Unemployment was 3.3%, 3.4% at the end of Biden's term. We're already up to like 4 point something percent. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs since the beginning of the year.
National debt.
Not even since he took office.
Yeah.
And grocery prices are up, oil prices are up, unemployment is up.
And now we're going to have a shortage of oil because of what's going on in Iran. Like there is a lot happening, and I think that lack of information, lack of balanced information, is not helpful.
No, but you're making a really good point, and I do not have the answer. I want to figure out the answer. How do we talk to these people that aren't open to thinking deeper, aren't open to having discussions that are not exactly the script that they're given by Fox News or by Truth
Exactly.
Social. How do you have conversations with those people? And especially because those people, they have that list running in their mind
Hmm.
and they just keep it on repeat. They're not it, and I don't know, this is just my opinion, but they're not even listening to you.
No.
So how do you reach someone who refuses to hear you? And they're just
Ultimately,
playing those parroting talking points on repeat in their mind.
ultimately, I keep seeing like a crumbling Lego mountain. I don't know why. I keep getting this visual where we're reaching the pinnacle of absurdity, and at some point that mountain is going to crumble and we're going to be left with the foundations, and that's where we come in to try to help pick up the pieces. Ultimately, we all need to collectively remember that we are all human beings and that we all want the same thing. We want freedom, happiness. We want people to coexist peacefully. If you don't want certain people to coexist gracefully, you're a racist and you need to fucking figure that shit out for yourself. But really, people on this earth just want to live their lives and be happy and spend
Yep.
time with their children and grandchildren and their good friends and just, play a game and have a glass of wine and meet somebody for coffee and go for a walk. This is what we want from our life. We don't need all of this rhetoric shoved down our throats, making us feel like our fellow human beings are the enemy, because they're not, and they never were, and they should never be. And so, how do we come back to that? How?
So I was, you know this, I was raised Mormon and I was as diehard Republican as they get,
Which,
right?
knowing you, is so fucking
It's
wild.
so bizarre, right?
Wild.
It's
Yeah.
crazy to me. And it happened gradually where I became more of a Democrat. And I remember when I was in college when Bush invaded Iraq, right?
Hmm.
And I was so upset and I was having these discussions with my roommates and their boyfriends. I remember we were all sitting in the front room of my apartment at BYU, and we were talking about it, and I said this is not a war that we can win. This isn't something that we're going to be in and out of. This is an occupation, and you can't superimpose democracy over a feudalistic society. And I
Right.
remember everyone was arguing, and finally they couldn't keep arguing with me because I like to think my ego getting in the way, that I was making too valid of points and they couldn't argue them with them. But
Most
I'm sure
likely.
that's not 100% accurate. But finally, they all looked at me and they're like, "You're a Democrat, aren't you?" And I was
And they use it
like,
as an insult.
but I was like shaken to my core, and I'm like, "No,
I'm a
I
human
am
being.
not a Democrat."
Yeah.
And then I started shifting. I think that was the moment for me. Like, there's not always a light bulb aha moment, but for me, that was the pivot. That was the pivot point for me. And I started by saying, socially, I agree with Democrats, but economically, I'm still a Republican, right? Which is
Hmm.
such a terrible thing to say. Like, I cringe
We've
now that I
all
even
said it.
say
We've all said it.
that.
Don't worry.
But
My
it's
husband has
it
said that.
but even now, I've been a Democrat since I was in my early 20s. I'm now in my 40s. Like, I
Hmm.
I don't know if I just don't remember, but and maybe I was like that, but I don't remember being that close-minded. I remember being open to having discussions with people. That didn't mean that I had to agree with them, but being able to just and I remember I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one in my sphere, and my sphere largely consists of Republicans, but we were able to have discussions with people that disagreed with us, and now that's just
Yeah.
not happening. Like, there had to have been a
Yeah.
shift somewhere along the line. Anyways, circling back to the book, one thing that I really loved, and I think that it's a very salient point, is when they start shifting to saving democracy. I really like the line where they said, "Writing this book has reminded us that American democracy is not as exceptional as we sometimes believe. There's nothing in our Constitution or our culture to immunize us against democratic breakdown." And I
Hmm.
think that we too often think that we're special, right? That we're immune to anything ever challenging our democracy, especially at a time when we haven't had anything bad happen in our country for a really long time, right? So it's
Hmm.
easy to become complacent. but we see ourselves as the pinnacle of democracy and as the torchbearers of democracy. So we're never going to fall. Our democracy is never going to fall. But I think that's why we're more at risk right now.
I completely agree with that. It's so true. And there's too many underlying factors. There's not just one thing. It's all the things that we've been discussing. And you know, our final point actually sort of drives that home in that our free press, our free inquiry, all of that is under threat right now. And this is a huge reason why we're doing this podcast, is to try not to fall into that. You know, I know that there are American citizens being detained upon coming back from being abroad because of curious travel history, amongst other completely dubious claims. So that's a concern, but it starts with journalism, universities, watchdogs. Let's see, more than 300 journalists have been jailed worldwide. Okay, so yes, we've been really focusing on the United States right now. We both live in the United States. We're both citizens of the United States. But this is happening globally. But most recently in 2026, Don Lemon and Georgia Fort were arrested, 2 U.S.-based journalists, for following coverage of anti-ICE protests.
That shook me to
my
core. It
shook me too.
Like I started actually visibly shaking when I heard that, because that was probably the most frightening, the most like, Jamie, get your head out of your ass, this is really happening moment for me. Which maybe that's dramatic, but I don't think it is dramatic. Like, that was a terrifying moment in American history.
And I'm not saying that we're journalists, we're not, we're just 2 regular, ordinary people, like we talked about before, but that concerns me, that if we're sitting here and we're having these conversations, are we going to be targets now because we're criticizing the government? It's absolutely possible. Technically, the First Amendment protects us from retaliation against the government, retaliation by the government, right? Like, but
using our voice is radical resistance, because we are opening ourselves up to, if we do descend, I'm not saying we're going to,
right,
calm down, but if we do descend into authoritarianism and fascism, we're opening ourselves up by using our voices, right?
We absolutely are.
So it's a tiny thing, and maybe it's a tiny thing because we can't do anything else but say, I refuse to give in to this. I refuse to fall in line. And if that means down the road that something's gonna happen to me, so be it. I refuse to quiet my voice.
Completely agree. And I think you were very shook by the arrests of the journalists, and they weren't the only ones. I agree. That was actually one of the signs for me that we needed to do this, because we've been, we've been kicking this around, just only for a few weeks. This all just kind of came together. But when it feels right, it feels right. And that really drove it home for me. And, that kind of brings us to sort of closing out our book discussion, really. One thing we wanted to point out in the book is that there actually is sort of indicators of authoritarian behavior. There's a table that talks about that. And so we're just going to read out. This is, Jamie, if you want to look on your book, it starts on page 23. It's that table on page 23. So I'll read one and you can do the next if you want, but we're just going to go through it really quickly because the pit of despair is deep right now, and we'll talk about what that is. But number 1, okay, out of 4 key indicators of authoritarian behavior. So again, it's How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. So number 1 of the 4 key indicators of authoritarian behavior: rejection of or weak commitment to democratic rules of the game.
Written or otherwise.
Check. Do they reject the Constitution or express a willingness to violate it? Do they suggest a need for anti-democratic measures, such as canceling elections, violating or suspending the Constitution, banning certain organizations, or restricting basic civil or political rights? Do they seek to use or endorse the use of extra-constitutional means to change the government, such as military coups, violent insurrections, hello January 6th, or mass protests aimed at forcing change in government? Do they attempt to undermine the legitimacy of elections?
Hello, Fulton County.
Fulton County, for example, by refusing to accept credible electoral results.
And isn't it fascinating that they're only undermining the election for 2020, but not 2024. Interesting. What's the difference? If there's voter fraud in one, why isn't there voter fraud in the other? But anyway, sorry.
Good question.
Number two, denial of the legitimacy of political opponents. Again, we've discussed this a lot, but do they describe their rivals as subversive or opposed to the existing constitutional order? Does that sound familiar?
No.
Do they claim that their rivals constitute an existential threat either to national security or to the prevailing way of life? Mm-hmm. Do they baselessly describe their partisan rivals as criminals? Oh, no. Whose supposed violation of the law or potential to do so disqualifies them from full participation in the political arena? Do they baselessly suggest that their rivals are foreign agents in that they are secretly working in alliance with or the employ of a foreign government, usually an enemy one? I think that Donald Trump checks like 5 times over every single box.
Every single one, but not just Donald Trump. I mean, who was the congressman who posted about New York City Mayor Mamdani? It was Tuberville, I think.
Oh my God.
He posted where Mamdani had a photo posted of his iftar celebrations, which if you don't know, for those of you who don't know, iftar is the breaking of the fast at the end of every day during the month of Ramadan, which is a holy month in Islam. And he posted a photo where he shared iftar with a number of his constituents of all religions and cultures and races. And then our illustrious senator, I believe he is, took a photo of the Twin Towers after they were hit, smoking Twin Towers, put a diptych together and said that the enemy is inside the gates. Excuse me, Senator, but fuck you. Fuck you. That is not how we behave in a civilized society. I can't. And you can't, like, trying to demonize the mayor of New York City for being a Muslim. I mean, it's not, he's demonizing you for being a Christian?
Yeah, and using 9/11 to do so is next level.
Disgusting.
Anyways.
Disgusting. All right, before I get into more stabby rage, here's number 3, toleration or encouragement of violence. So do they have any ties to armed groups, paramilitary forces, militias, guerrillas, or other organizations that engage in illicit violence? Have they or their partisan allies sponsored or encouraged mob attacks on opponents? Have they tacitly endorsed violence by their supporters by refusing to unambiguously condemn and punish it? Have they praised or refused to condemn other significant acts of political violence, either in the past or elsewhere in the world? There are good people on both sides, aren't there, Jamie?
I think I know that's exactly what I was thinking when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today.
Yeah.
But I think that I would add to this list of 4, and I would add one more really important one, and it's changing of history, right? So what was it, 1984? The party.
Oh, yeah.
He who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future. And so when you're rewriting history to fit your narrative and taking down exhibits in our national museums and rewriting history, that's terrifying to me. And talking about the reason this triggered that for me is we all lived through January 11th. We saw the videos. We heard the firsthand accounts. There are
you mean September 11th?
January 6th.
January 6th. Okay, sorry.
January 6th. We lived through it. We saw it happening, right? People are still traumatized by it. People died. And the White House has completely rewritten history regarding it. And people are just believing it. Like, how you are complicit in this by believing the lies instead of your own eyes.
Well, same thing with Renee Good and Alex Preddy. We saw the videos, several videos from different angles of what happened to these U.S. citizens.
His gun. Fuck you.
Fuck you. He was not pulling his gun. You shot him in the back. More than once.
Point blank.
But then we're being told that you were instigating? Yeah.
That was horrifying.
But
and
this
the
is
fact
the point.
that it was immediately rewriting history.
Immediately. I saw that. No, you didn't.
Just believe it.
Yeah. You can't tell us what we saw is completely incorrect. It's not how it works.
100%.
That is not how it works. We will not let you.
But it is how it works, and that's what I find so
It shouldn't be how
infuriating.
it
Is
works.
it's
Yeah.
working. It's working, Melissa. Like they're
Oh,
doing it, and
I
people are
know.
falling in line.
But it
And
can't be
they're like,
working with
well, there are
everybody.
two sides to every story. I watched the whole fucking video. That was murder.
It was
Okay.
murder. It was exactly murder. And then he like joked about it and bragged about it both times, both guys.
Yeah, both sides.
Um,
All right.
so
Sorry.
go ahead, number 4.
Readiness to curtail civil liberties of opponents, including media. Have they supported laws or policies that restrict civil liberties, such as expanding libel or defamation laws, or laws restricting protest, criticism of the government, or certain civic or political organizations? Have they threatened to take legal or other punitive action against critics? We've talked extensively about this today, in rival parties, civil society, or the media. Have they praised repressive measures taken by other governments, either in the past or elsewhere in the world?
I love Orban. I know. Doesn't he say it like that? He's got a little fan mail going, or fangirling going. Basically, if you were to look at that list, think about what we've discussed, think about what you've seen happening in the United States and elsewhere in the world, but specifically for the United States, you would see that our government, our leaders, are meeting every single piece of criteria, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So we encourage you to pick up a copy of this book, because I think one can only come to a conclusion themselves, and hopefully this might spark a little bit of debate. But before we let you go, we want to welcome you to a little segment we like to call Escape from the Pit of Despair. So I have been joking that all of these poli-sci and history books and everything else that I've been reading keep me in the pit of despair, because as I read, I share on Instagram what book I'm on, and I'll say I'm still in the pit of despair, but sometimes I need to escape. And if you don't understand that reference, you probably are not a Gen Xer or millennial, or you've never seen Princess Bride.
And you should go watch Princess Bride immediately.
You absolutely should. You absolutely should. But we do need, with each of our podcast episodes here, to escape from the pit of despair. So Jamie and I decided we want to share with you something that has been uplifting for us. It can be a book, it can be a podcast, a show, an act of kindness, whatever. It doesn't matter. Something that takes us out of that pit of despair. I'll start because we actually already mentioned it earlier. I actually read this book, Book and Dagger by Elise Graham. It's a great book. Just a quick synopsis about this. It highlights sort of lesser known but extremely inspiring piece of history from World War II. As I mentioned, I'm not super well versed in the history of this country. World War II was basically 2 paragraphs in the Ottoman history books that I was subjected to. I shouldn't say it like that. In the Ottoman history books that I used in my learning in high school. So I've been learning a lot about it. But this one is particularly how scholars, librarians, and academics kind of ended up being some of the most effective intelligence agents during World War II and in the Nazi resistance. And so it really, it profiles some really interesting people and sort of how they came to use their academic experience in helping, I guess, pinpoint some intelligence issues and intelligence items that most field agents never would. I mean, we're talking about cartographers, art historians, journalists, people who are scrappy and have real world experience in a different manner than somebody who's like, you know, running ops. So I highly recommend this. It's actually a very, very quick read. I just read it. I actually read it on a plane to go see Jamie and then come back, and I finished the whole thing on the plane. So maybe a total of 5 hours. I am a speed reader, but I highly recommend this book. And it was uplifting because it kind of reminded us, and it gave us our little power from Power Below quote, that ordinary people can make a difference. Because all of these people were ordinary people. I'm an ordinary people. You guys are out there, ordinary people. Jamie is a kind of extraordinary people, but you know. But this is my favorite thing for this escape from the pit of despair.
All right, so I thought long and hard about this, and my escape from the pit of despair is not as cerebral as Mel's. But I did very recently finish reading this book called My Husband's Wife. Have you heard of it?
No.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's by Alice Feeney, I think is her name. I'd never read a book by her before. It was sort of this mystery, but it had me guessing from page one to the final page. Like I was
Ooh.
never fully, some mysteries I can get it pretty
Yeah.
quick. Most of them I can get them
I
pretty
challenge
quickly
myself to
done,
do
right?
that. I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
know who
I'm
did
like,
this.
I already know what's happening and it's chapter
Yeah.
one. I had
Yeah.
no idea what was fucking happening in this book, and it was written so well, and the characterizations were done so that I was enthralled from start to finish, and the whole time I'm sitting here trying to figure out what is happening, and I'm telling you, it is the most gripping mystery that I think I've ever read before in my life. I loved it. The writing was top notch. The
Ooh.
setting was beautiful. It was this like seaside village in the UK that I want to live in forever.
I'm
And the
in.
people were all kind of terrible, but in a charming, wonderful way that made you love them. And then at the end, everything just kind of flips, and you're like, wait, what?
Ooh, okay. So I've got a really
Um,
long flight coming up. Good
yeah, yeah,
choice for
yeah.
that.
This is the
Okay.
perfect long flight book, and
Awesome.
it's a quick, easy read. Yeah, I loved it.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great escape, and you know, let's go back to the collapse of civilization now. Um,
Yeah, because we can only talk about the heavy stuff for so long before we want to
so
scream.
true. But we'll provide our reading lists on our website. So that's astheworldburns.show. And with that, thank you for listening to this inaugural episode of As the World Burns.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who still believes democratic norms are not optional accessories.
And please follow your podcast wherever you get your shows. Visit our website, astheworldburns.show. Follow us on social. On Instagram, we are astheworldburnspod. Thank you to our incredible producer, Hillary Horgan from Bluefoot Entertainment. And our show notes and everything will be available to you guys, including sources. And yeah, see you soon.
Bye.